Recording in progress.
We've been jinxed by Commissioner Smith.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Monday, October 3, 2022 meeting of the Transportation Commission of the City of Meridian. You're all kind of looking around a little bit because there's some new faces in the room, and we will get to those in a moment. Let's start with a roll call. David Ballard. Zachary Shoemaker. Here. Ron Lancaster. I am present. Tracy Hopkins.
Here.
Stephen Lewis.
Here.
Jared Smith.
Here.
In person. Good job. Tom LeClaire.
Here.
And our newest member, sitting down next to Mr. Lewis, is Hyun Song. He is the new youth commissioner, having been appointed when Joseph Leckie graduated. And I am ashamed to say that we did not recognize Mr. Leckie his last day. I was unaware he was graduating out. I do know that the mayor has sent him a suitable for framing certificate, which will look good in his dorm room back east at
Michigan.
Michigan?
Yeah.
Okay. And he's studying, do you know?
I think electrical engineering.
Electrical engineering. Good for him. But anyway, Hyun, welcome. If you have a couple of things you'd like to say about yourself, anything about personal you'd like to say and about what grade you're in and what you're interested in, and we're, like I say, we're very pleased to have you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Hoyun Song. I'm a junior at Bishop Kelly High School, and I'm also I'm the Vice Government Affairs Chair of the Mayor's Youth Advisory Council here. So I really enjoy the things that go around this community, and through this commission, I really wanted to do more for the community I lived in. So, yeah, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Were you born and raised in Meridian or the Valley?
No, actually, I was born in Korea, but when I was 7, I moved to Boise, and then when I was in 10th grade, I moved to Meridian. So. Yep.
Okay, great. Looking forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Okay, we also have with us a new police department representative. It seems that Sergeant Dance got shuffled, not out, I don't think up, but just sideways. And Corporal Randy Goodspeed will be taking his position, hopefully meeting with us monthly when we meet, as best his things on the street allow it. But welcome, glad to have you with us, and look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, the next item is the adoption of the agenda, and I have one change I'd like to propose, which is to delete the police department report because Corporal Goodspeed, our first thought was he wouldn't be here till next month. Then he was able to get here, so that's good, but we're not going to put him on the spot for a report, so we'll drop that one item out of the agenda. So the chair would entertain a motion and a second for adoption of the agenda with that one change. Have a motion?
Second.
Second? I never know which of you
Miss-
two are,
Me.
okay.
Who was the motion, Mr. Chair? Thank you.
Mr. Hopkins was the second. Your voices are so close together. Okay, the next item is I guess we need to vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next item is approval of the minutes from August 1 and September 12. So Chair would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, on the August 1st minutes, just one correction on page 4 of the packet, item 4, your name is misspelled.
We have picked that up under a Scrivener's error, and there's also a typo in there, and Miranda has both of those changes. Thank you.
Awesome.
Mr. Chair, I move we adopt the minutes.
Okay. Mr. Hopkins made a
Approved.
motion to adopt. Do we have a second? Second. Have a second. Mr. Shoemaker? Any other discussion? That was Tom LeClaire. Well, at least I can see y'all. Miranda's sitting over there in the hole can't, so she's trying to guess who's doing what.
I knew who it was on that one, Mr.
You
Chair.
knew that one, okay. All right, motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor to approve the minutes of the August 1 and September 12 meetings, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. I would like to take one moment and thank ACHD for the opportunity to tour their ops building last month. I've heard good things from several people about how insightful it was, helpful it was. I had never been there. I found it very interesting. I can't go through an intersection anymore without looking up for the camera, but that's okay. But we do appreciate it, and thank you very much for that, Sean, for setting that up. Okay, old business, we have one item, and that's Miranda with the transportation projects update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As per usual, I'm not going to go through everything that's highlighted in the packet. New information is in bold. I'll highlight a few of those and then stand for questions. Excuse me. ACHD is going to begin work on their integrated 5-year work plan process. We'll be getting that email, or we should be getting that invitation letter in November to participate in that process with them. So be prepared in November to begin discussing the prioritization of our city projects. If the prioritization subcommittee wants to meet prior to that initial conversation, I would invite you to set up a time sometime in October, and just a reminder that I do need 5 days notice to notice that meeting. On page 9, I also wanted to highlight the Eagle Road. There's some signal improvements. So ITD, that is an ITD roadway that ACHD controls the signals on, and it's been an item in the packet for a while that they're doing some signal improvements, and I got an update on that, that the work's going to continue through the remainder of the year, that they're just optimizing some of the timing at those signals. On page 11, I wanted to highlight that the Chinden West final phase is began construction in September, and that will go through December, and then some work will begin again in February through the summer of 2023. That's the final phase of the project from Meridian to Locust Grove. Idaho Highway 16 kicked off in August, and it's anticipated to be complete in 2024. The segments that were listed in the previous packets still stand. In addition, there are now also some minor adjustments being made to local roadways that will be affected by the opening of that State Highway 16. And finally, I wanted to call to your attention State Highway 55 Eagle Road safety review. There was a conversation, or there has been conversations regarding the speed on Eagle Road for I'm not sure how long those conversations have been going on, but it's been a while that we've been conversing. ITD did present to council. That was noted in your packet at the last meeting that ITD was going to present to council. They did give that presentation, and out of that came a safety review team that includes ITD and the city of Meridian, possibly additional folks being added to that in the future. The full scope of that team hasn't been fleshed out yet, but there was a kickoff meeting and then another meeting to discuss the scope of that review and that team. So as that continues to evolve, I will keep you updated on the progress of that group. And, oh, I was wrong. I do have one more thing I want to highlight. VRT's Route 30, so local route through Meridian, started today. So it kicked off today. It is free to ride in October. So if you want to see how that new route is working, you can go onto their site. There's some great trip planners there. You can ride that route free in October, and if you download their app, then you get another month free. So just wanted to highlight that. We've got some transit improvements kicking off this month, and I can stand for any questions on the project updates.
Any questions for Miranda?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Leclerc.
Miranda, did the mayor make comments to introduce the ITD folks, or any kind of sort of scoping discussion about what the safety review would be? Or is it just presenting and city council listening?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Leclerc, so ITD presented to council just on some preliminary speed study. I wouldn't go as far as to call it a speed study. Some preliminary speed checks that they did on Eagle Road. They sent out some smaller crews just to do some really early checks of what those speeds looked like at a couple different times. I think it was 2 different times of day. And they brought that information to the council, discussed the evolution of the land uses around Eagle Road, the evolution of Eagle Road as a state highway, and what the results of those speed checks were. City Council had a pretty firm stance that they wanted to see some safety improvements on Eagle Road, suggested being that the speed limit be lowered, but at the very least they wanted to see safety improvements because they have heard from constituents that the constituents in our neighborhood, in our community, feel that it's too fast. So ITD went forth with that and established a safety review team. So the kickoff meeting, we kind of discussed who should be on that team, and then and kind of what that would look like, and determined that we needed to come up with a scope. So then the following meeting, we started work on the scope. So I don't have all the answers as to what that scope looks like yet. We did talk about a lot of possibilities, the different methodologies used in speed studies, the standard way speed studies are done now, what we could do differently, what we would use that's currently being used, who else would be added to that team. So there's still a lot of details to flesh out. It's really early in the process, but we're hoping that from the city side that process isn't one that takes a year. We're hoping that it's a short process, so do expect to see updates in your packet over the next 6 months or so, and hopefully then we'll have some culmination of our efforts with some recommended changes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Miranda. Thanks very much.
Anyone else with anything? I have one thing. It's the top of page 8, the 10-mile road Victory to Overland and 10-mile Victory roundabout. The report about 1 lane in each direction being open was correct, I'm sure, at the time Miranda pulled that down. But since then, they've had a ribbon cutting last Friday, I think it was, and I drove it after I saw this in the minutes, and all 4 lanes are open. They were putting some of the last striping down around the roundabout the day I drove it. So if you have a chance, you're out that way, you might drive it just to see what a really nice new road looks like. They got done a month early. They coordinated with farmers who were concerned about shutdowns during harvest season and did some shuffling about what they were doing in that regard, I'm told. So that's one done. I just realized that in the attendance, I neglected to call the ex officios. I got so taken with Mr. Song.
Mr. Chair, I did a visual roll call for those.
So you have those all
Yes,
picked
Mr.
up?
Chair.
Looking at Sean, I realized I'd forgotten him. Okay. All right. With that, we will move ahead to new business. The first item is about railways in the Treasure Valley. And we're pleased to have with us Boise City Councilwoman Elaine Clegg, and from Compass, Leila Klopfenstein. I saw them do a version of this in March at Valley Regional Transit's Advisory Council meeting and was quite taken by it. And since that time, as Elaine's going to explain when she presents hers, things have changed for the better. So at that time, I'm going to take a little of your thunder and say she was talking about what could happen in the future. Well, we don't have Amtrak, so don't jump that far. But things have happened, so she'll talk about that. But Leila's going to go first. If you'd like to come to the podium, and Miranda will key up your presentation. Welcome, ladies. You need to turn that mic on and then speak right into it.
Testing? Okay.
There you go.
I do want to note that I was able to ride the Route 30 Pine to work today, so that was a great moment. As Mr. Chairman had just explained, I am a public transportation planner at Compass, which is the metropolitan planning organization for Ada and Canyon counties. We do all sorts of transportation planning, not limited to public transportation, but really anything to do with the roadways. So let's get started. All right. So what I'll be speaking to you about today is the history of high-capacity transit planning in the region and our proposed next steps. So I wanted to start by talking about what high-capacity transit is. So it is public transportation service that's faster than a local bus, carries more people than a local bus, and has improved service and amenities. So what that means is that the bus is going to come more frequently, or I keep saying bus, but what I mean is the service is going to be more frequent, and then the stops have more amenities, meaning shelters or benches, things like this. So high-capacity transit is not just rail. There are several different modes. There's three I'll highlight today that we're looking at. There's bus rapid transit, which is a bus that typically fits more passengers than a bus that you would see out on the roads today. And it travels within a dedicated lane, so only buses can travel in that lane. Commuter rail is a heavy rail vehicle that travels on heavy rail tracks. So it could run on the Union Pacific rail that runs through the city of Meridian that currently freight transports on. And then lastly, light rail. Is a train, but it speeds up faster than a heavy rail train, being that it is lighter, and it also runs in a dedicated lane, typically on the roadway. So at Compass, we are working with our member agencies and other stakeholders to conduct preliminary planning for a high-capacity transit service that would run east to west from the city of Caldwell through the city of Nampa, through the city of Meridian, and then terminate in the city of Boise. It is important to note that State Street is planned to be the high-capacity transit option north of the Boise River. So we're looking at something south of the Boise River. The reason we are conducting this research right now is really because of population growth in the region. Since 1970, our population has doubled almost every 25 years, and by 2050, Compass forecasts that we will have a little over 1 million people living in the valley. So again, this is the reason we are studying high-capacity transit, because we want to be prepared for a future with more people living in the valley and ensuring that there are transportation options for people to get where they need to go. We also know from other metropolitan areas, such as Austin, Dallas, Denver, Phoenix, Salt Lake, and others, that these projects take decades to plan for and build, so we really do need to start now in order to make sure we're prepared for the future. Both VRT and Compass have studied high-capacity transit options since 2003, and we've also integrated, or the region has integrated those planning efforts into regional transportation planning documents, such as the Regional Long-Range Transportation Plan, Communities in Motion, as well as Valley Regional Transit's Valley Connect Plan 2.0. Passenger rail is also included in the statewide rail plan. Most recently in 2021, in order to prepare for our new long-range transportation plan that is out for public comment right now, Compass conducted 3 surveys to really understand the region's preference for growth. So in the first 2 surveys, survey participants told us that they preferred growth patterns that included improved public transportation service. And then in our third survey, we knew we needed to dig in a little bit more into understanding what those preferences were. So we conducted this survey called All Aboard, received nearly 12,000 responses. And what we heard from respondents was that they wanted the region to invest in a quality system for success with ample and well-placed stops for access, flexible route changes that was separated from traffic with flexible capacity, and also provided access to destinations in the region. Skip that. So based on the survey results, as well as the analysis that we've conducted as a region on these different modes and alignments for high-capacity transit options, the Compass Board of Directors approved regional rail on the Boise cutoff alignment last June. So we incorporated regional rail on the Boise cutoff alignment into our Communities in Motion 2050 vision, which is the growth and transportation vision for the region. So it shows here that the rail line would run through Meridian. And then in June of 2022, just a few months ago, the Compass Board of Directors directed staff at Compass to fund the high-capacity transit planning and environmental linkages study. So what this would do is conduct technical analysis on the options that we've already studied, and we've conducted preliminary studies thus far, but we haven't gotten to the point where the Federal Transit Administration would accept that as technical analysis that they could then provide funding for. So that's where we are today. Looking ahead, in fall of 2022, Compass is planning to work with our member agencies to develop a scope of work for that pending study. In the short term, we would conduct the study, and then in the long term, secure funding, conduct environmental review, build capital infrastructure, and then begin the service. So I'll stop there for any questions that you may have for me at this time.
Questions for Leela?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Smith?
So thank you for this presentation, really interesting. And, I'm a big fan of the concept. I'm curious around the idea of these future activity centers and the impact on local development around these areas. Is obviously this is beyond the scope of what you're doing now, but with this planning in mind, do these activity centers, are they more in the area surrounding the orange on the map, et cetera? Are you foreseeing more transit-oriented development, upzoning, things like that, or is that kind of being planned separately in kind of a vacuum?
Yes, so Commissioner Smith and Mr. Chairman, that's a great question, and the answer to it is yes, public transportation service requires density in order to provide access. We have heard from our member agencies that they want Compass to be able to provide them the viable option, or I guess the feasible public transportation option that they can then build their land use plans off of. Right now, there's a lot of options on the table, and we have a locally preferred option, which is that regional rail line I just shared with you all about. But again, that's not something that the FTA would accept at this point in time. So we're working to make sure that we can provide the information to our land use agencies so that they can build the land use plans to support this kind of service.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Oh, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Leclerc?
Lila, I heard two things. I heard a route was on State Street, and then the map that went by showed, looked like, I didn't catch the street, but it looked like a central street in Meridian. And this main map we're looking at shows kind of both. So what, is this going to, I know everything's being studied, but is the thinking that there would be a State Street first and then we'd grow the system over time, or would there be phases, or what? What do you think?
I'll start with Commissioner Leclerc and Mr. Chair. I'll start with the State Street portion of your question. So State Street has been studied for a lot longer, and they're a lot further in their planning process. And they just received as part of the new infrastructure bill, $8.5 million to build out that corridor. So that is the high-capacity transit option north of the Boise River. So this is a separate effort that's looking at something that goes from the east to the west to facilitate transportation south of the Boise River. The option being shown on the screen right now is the regional rail line, which we've incorporated into our regional long-range transportation plan. And State Street is also shown in that dotted line, which shows high-capacity transit. So two different modes. One is rail, one is bus, and two different routes, and then two different places in the planning process.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Sorry, one last question, and this is from a layman's perspective, so forgive me if there's an easy reason that this is not the case. But is this being developed, looking at this map, seeing essentially a straight line out to Caldwell south of the river and a pretty straight line up to Star north of the river, is there, with growth not likely ending at 2050, right, and continuing in the future, are there plans being placed to ensure potential interconnectivity as, for growth in the future, say if they connect in Middleton, in 2080, for example? Is that kind of being approached with some level of interoperability in mind, or do you,
So Compass conducts future analysis for the future growth of the region. And our horizon year for this long-range plan is 2050. So that's as far as our demographic forecasts go out to. So really the demographic forecast is what all of the modeling and the transportation analysis is built off of. So right now we only have 2050 numbers is what I'm trying to say. So no, we don't go out to 2080. We do have a robust public transportation system in the 2050 plan, which is out for public comment until October 16th if anyone wants to check it out. But portions of that system are funded and portions of it are not funded. And that system is really what we're trying to build towards. Did I answer
That's
the
helpful,
question?
yeah.
Okay.
Anyone else? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. Councilwoman Clegg, welcome to Meridian.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I'll wait for my presentation to come up, but I really appreciate the invitation by your chairman to come and talk about maybe the next level up on what we're thinking about on the rail corridor. So restoring passenger rail in the Treasure Valley is something I've been interested in for a very long time. when COVID hit, started talking to a few people around the region, and we put together a couple of Zoom calls and ended up with 50 people that we found in Montana and Idaho and Oregon, Washington, and Utah who were interested. We've since added some folks in Wyoming and North Dakota and South Dakota. As a result of those, there's now a passenger rail authority in Montana, and we've had a rail summit in the region. And most importantly, we worked with the congressional delegations in Montana and Idaho specifically to make sure that the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act, better known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, included some of the things that we needed to make rail work in this region. So why rail? Why now? Rural America's long been underserved with rail options since about the 2000s. Much of the rural part of the nation hasn't had any rail service. Much of it was lost in the 70s, and it just got worse from there. And yet the people in this region help pay for the rail all over the rest of the country. And there are two particular lines, the Pioneer, which used to run from Seattle to Salt Lake, through Portland and Boise and Pocatello, and the North Coast Hiawatha, which ran from Seattle to Minneapolis through Coeur d'Alene, Missoula, Butte, Bozeman, Billings, and Fargo. And right now, the only passenger rail in this region is the Empire Builder, which goes from Seattle to Minneapolis, but virtually skirts the northern border of the country where there's no population. So while it's a good long-distance option, it misses out on part of the beauty of long-distance rail, which is the overlapping markets that rail can provide for. Airline service is point-to-point. If I buy a ticket from Boise to Seattle, I can't stop in Portland or Pendleton or somewhere else in between. But if I buy a rail ticket, I can do that. And that point-to-point, or that overlapping market service really is an economic benefit that we think is missing in the region today. And especially as our population ages, it's a transportation option that we think will be really exciting and popular with parts of the population. I don't know about you, I've got a couple of kids in Seattle. I don't like driving that road from November to end of March. It's just not a lot of fun. So I either fly or I don't go. And sometimes it doesn't work to fly. Sometimes we have the time, we'd rather take the slow train, but we don't have an option. There's a lot of folks in Pendleton who use medical services in this region, and it's really hard for them to get here in the winter to access those medical services or other services. So this is the kind of trip that we think is particularly important right now with rail. There's a lot of economic benefits to rail. You'll hear that, I'm sure that Amtrak costs a lot of money and loses a lot of money. What isn't ever studied in those is the economic benefit that it brings. So they study the operation of the train, they study the fare box recovery, and they don't study all of the other economic impacts of having that train. But if you do that, Amtrak actually returns between 7 and 8 billion each year to the nation's GDP over what we spend on it. And here's a few of the select routes and the kinds of impact they have. You can see the Empire Builder in our region returns 10 times the investment. There are environmental advantages. I think, we're beginning to see that it is time to act to try and slow down what's happening to our climate and the impacts it's having on us. Trains are 3 times more efficient than a car. They have a lower energy footprint than trucks or passenger cars. Overall, transportation represents even pretty conservatively 29% of all U.S. emissions, and that continues to rise. And so any movement that we can shift from cars or trucks onto train can save us a lot in terms of those emissions. Like I said, local governments have been supporting rail that doesn't serve their residents. Aging Americans really want to make these trips in a different way. Remote work has begun to impact this as well, especially with COVID. It's become more and more important, and people like having the outdoor amenities and the other quality of life that they can find in Idaho. They can work somewhere else, and having access by rail makes that easier for them to do. And frankly, younger Americans actually many times prefer a different kind of vehicle than a car, if it's available. So I noted that we got some things in the IIJA to help. Included was $15 million to study all the long-distance lines that had been discontinued since 1971. That includes the Pioneer and the North Coast Hiawatha. It also includes the Desert Wind, which went from Salt Lake to Los Angeles through Las Vegas, and then a couple of other lines further east, and then any lines that aren't traveling daily right now. FRA has released an RFP to hire the contractors to begin that study. They only have 14 months to complete it and return those findings to Congress. So very soon we should be getting contact by folks who are wanting to understand what impact would restoring the Pioneer have on this region. And we're prepared to talk to them about that. I'll show you a slide in a minute that shows all the money, but included in the bill is $12 billion with a B for funding for long-distance routes. We were adamant that if they were going to do that, they really had to set aside a portion for rural long-distance routes. And so $4 billion of that $12 billion is set aside for rural long-distance routes. And even though Boise itself doesn't quite qualify as rural, the route itself does. And so we'd be eligible for that money. And then there's authorization for up to 10 regional rail compacts, which is an idea to create interstate bodies, much like Compass is in this region for the cities, where the states can work across state lines to apply for grants, apply for funding, doing planning on these rail routes, which often cross state lines. So the bill overall has over $100 billion in it. This is up to 10 times as much money for rail as we've seen in the last 30 or 40 years. People are very excited about it because finally there's an opportunity to do things that a lot of people have been not just talking about, but recognizing really need to be done. A lot of this money is going to go to Amtrak. Much of that is going to be spent on the Northeast Corridor, as it should. The Northeast Corridor moves a lot of people. Amtrak owns that line. They can move even more people and do it more efficiently if they spend some money there. But a lot more of the money is also available for the rest of the country. And Amtrak is recognizing, despite not recognizing us early on, that this region is ready for rail. And this is what I mean by not recognizing us. This is the U.S. Connect map, or Connect Us map, that Amtrak produced 2 years ago, and doesn't include us. A lot of people live in this region, and we think that there's a real opportunity to connect this region, both with the Pioneer, the North Coast Hiawatha, but also some connecting routes in between. Imagine, for instance, if there was a route from Pocatello to Butte that had a spur that went up to Ashton and could serve Yellowstone. Imagine if the Desert Wind got connected to the Pioneer and you could go all the way from Portland to Las Vegas. There's just a lot of opportunity in this region that hasn't been realized. And we're pretty excited that Amtrak finally realizes we're on the map and is talking to us. So the next steps on this part of it are to support this FRA study. Those consultants, I expected them to be named 2 weeks ago. I'm waiting any day now to figure out who it is and get started participating in commenting on this study. Much like the long-range transportation plan, we'll have an opportunity to comment. We're trying to figure out how to join an interstate rail compact. We made comment to FRA on our interest in that, and comment noting that if it requires like legislation between all of the states, it's going to be much more difficult to do. Those are the kinds of compacts that have been formed previously. So FRA is now figuring out what it would take. In our state, we've been talking to the governor, we've been talking to ITD, and a little bit to the legislature about what action they'd be willing to take to at least get us started. It looks like the governor's office and ITD are interested in naming a passenger rail advisory committee as a first step to begin thinking about what it would take to do passenger rail here. There's also a process called the Corridor Identification Program, and it's a program by which various regions can say, we have a corridor in our region we're interested in pursuing investments in it and pursuing legislation if needed to support it. And here's what it is. So this region identified 2 corridors. We identified the long distance corridor of the Pioneer, but we also identified a shorter corridor from Salt Lake to Boise, where there's a lot of traffic in between every day. And we think that with the right combination of planning and political will, we can get the 2 legislatures to act in those 2 states to help support a line there. There's also money in the IIJA to improve infrastructure, and we are positioning ourselves to go after that, and then the regional rail that Lila talked about. So this is the process by which the FRA will study our route. I've already talked about it, so I won't go into much more detail, but we are expecting any day to get outreach on that. This is what the rail network looked like in the United States in 1967, pre-Amtrak. We had 3 times daily service between Boise and Portland, Boise and Salt Lake. And we expect that the study will show, as it did in 2009, that this service is ripe to be restored. This is the service just a mere 3 years later. And again, we want that restored. Interstate compacts, again, I've talked about that a bit. We hope that by beginning this rail advisory group, we can begin the process of figuring out what it'll take to join one. The Southern Rail Commission was formed after Katrina to reestablish the Gulf Coast line, and they've been pretty successful in their work. So the FRA held listening sessions. I did not update this, sorry. A month ago, there was a listening session which we participated in, and we put in the comments on September 19th. And of course, we've been having these discussions with the governor's office. So these are the 2 routes that we put in for the Corridor ID program. One is the long distance route, one is the one that's less than 750 miles that would require state support, and that's the solid red one. And then finally, the CRISI, or Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements Grant, is one much like RAISE, which you're probably familiar with on roadways, which can be used to improve the infrastructure on a rail line. City of Boise happens to own the rail line that is outlined in red there. Union Pacific owns everything in blue. Because it's only the City of Boise and we have a lease operator, we're pursuing a beginning of this CRISI program on our 18 miles, because we have the 2 of us already on board. We don't have to go out and try to get everybody else on board. and this is due December 1st. Our freight rail operator is now on the hook to improve that rail because we have been activating our industrial park for the city of Boise. And in that activation, they're required to improve the rail once it hits a certain number of cars per year. We could use their investment to match the federal grant and then improve that rail, not just to freight standards, but to passenger standards. There's a variety of classes for rail, and we'd aim for class 3 or class 4 if we do this. To be determined down the road would be to go after Chrissy grants on the other 17 miles that runs through Meridian that's owned by UP. It's going to be a much bigger lift. All of you guys would have to be on board. UP would have to be on board. Nampa and Caldwell would have to be on board. We think it's well worth it, and we think if we get FRA to say, yes, it should be reestablished as an Amtrak line, we'll have Amtrak in our pocket to help us. So that's to come. We already talked about the regional commuter rail. This is the line as it runs from Caldwell to Boise, but as you know, it also goes south of the depot in Boise to Micron, or very close to Micron, and our industrial park. And interestingly, the Air Force Base and the city of Mountain Home have indicated that they'd be very, very interested in participating in something if we can get it up and running. They have between 1,500 and 2,000 people a day move back and forth between the two communities right now. They've had a lot of their Air Force members have had car accidents on their way to and from work, and they are very interested in providing a better way to get their folks back and forth. So we're pretty excited about not just the opportunity in the middle of the valley, but perhaps beyond. So what's next? Already talked about this now back down to the regional level, the high-capacity transit planning and environmental leakages study. I think that's the most important thing that all of us in this region can be working on in the meantime. City of Boise and Compass and ITD will work on the Chrissy grant, and then the FRA opportunity, as soon as it becomes available, I'll make sure that your chairman knows and you all can have an opportunity to participate in that as well. So there's no depot in downtown Meridian right now, but there might be an opportunity to build one. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Questions for Mrs. Clegg?
I'm trying to formulate some further questions. The hamster wheel's kind of going a little fast right now. Would it be possible? I don't see that in the packet. Would we be able to get a hold of this presentation just to look over it some more?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Smith, I can send that out. I have it.
Send both of them, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely, I'd love for you to have them.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Leclerc.
Councilwoman Clegg, thanks for coming. Appreciate your updates and information. One of the things in the small efforts we've made to just kind of improve the corridor through Meridian, Union Pacific has been not so cooperative. Do you find that there's any changes happening there? Are they interested in allowing some more access to that corridor, or is it just going to always be a stakeholder hurdle? So,
If I may interrupt that question by adding one of my own on top of it, do you have UP's phone number somewhere? I mean, you actually have one?
Yes, actually, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Leclerc. It's a great question. And one of the reasons I've been so insistent that if we do this, we need to get Amtrak at the table is that in 1967, when the Class 1 freight railroads said, hey, we want out of our deal to provide passenger rail service in the country, there was a clause put in federal regulation that if a line was deemed a long-distance line, that the Class 1 was required to negotiate with Amtrak. They're not required to negotiate with us, and they're not required to meet any standard if they negotiate with us. But in fact, there's a very important ruling before the Surface Transportation Board by the Southern Rail Commission and CSX right now on what that negotiation has to look like, who has to provide what information. The Class 1s continue to claim proprietary ownership of all information about freight capacity, scheduling, all of those things, and this ruling, we think, is going to change that. So if Amtrak is, in fact, named as one of the participants on our rail line, we'll have a real leverage point with UP that we don't have today. So that's first. Second is I am the chairman of the Transportation and Infrastructure Services Committee for the National League of Cities this year. And as chairman, I've requested a roundtable at our city summit in Kansas City in November with all of the Class 1 railroads. And they are all going to come and participate. I just got word last week that everyone has accepted that invitation. Soon as I put out that invitation, Amtrak called and said, can we come? So they're also going to be there. And now a couple of the short line operators want in. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. I don't know exactly what will come out of it, but I do know that the conversations I've had with our regional representative of UP, who's in Portland, and the regional representative of UP who covers Montana and Utah, they are talking much more positively about participating and partnering and figuring out a way to make this work. One of the things, another leverage point, another key to that is that because of all the money in the bill, they see an opportunity to do infrastructure improvements on the lines that they own. But in order to get those, they have to partner with a local government or a state government because the bill doesn't allow Class 1s to apply for the money by themselves. So we've built in a couple of leverage points, and we think hopefully that they're going to actually work this time. We'll see. But great question. Thank you.
My phone number question was something of an old joke in working on infrastructure, trying to get a railroad to talk to you about whether or not you can bore up under it to put a water line through or to go over the top of it or whatever has always been have you found any way to talk to anybody there yet kind of question. I think Mr. Lewis may recognize that as an engineer.
Yeah.
Other questions for Ms. Clegg? Yes, sir.
So I've been trying to think through the specific question asked here. I don't tell anyone I come from. I was born and raised in a state to the southwest of here that might not be named, but growing up in a very car-centric community, having seen the impact of building new lines and high-speed rail and things like that, and the pushback that there's been had, whether deserved or not. My question is, especially around the new lines and the interconnections, have you encountered any, any resistance along that line, and are there any thoughts about how to avoid this becoming kind of a partisan issue like it has in other states?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Smith, I really appreciate that question as well because I've thought a lot about it. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. We need to move people. If we're going to have 1.2 million people in this valley, we have a couple of choices. We can fill the valley up with both roads and rooftops, and we can become the San Fernando Valley, as I see it. I mean, it didn't work very well then. I have a couple of kids who lived in LA for a number of years, and one time I was on the ground for 42 hours, and I spent 30 of those 42 hours in a car trying to get around. it's not a great place to be. And you can build as many roads as you want, and it's still not a great place to be because it just doesn't work. And I mean, if somebody can show me a place where that does work, hallelujah, I'd love to see it. I haven't yet seen it. So I think for me, it's not a question of either or, it's a question of all of the above. And the places that I've seen that do work are the places that do have choices. My daughter went to school in Richmond, Virginia, which is really about the size of this region. They have Amtrak. They have a really great bus rapid transit system. And they have a lot of people driving. But because they have all of it, it actually works pretty well. And people can get a lot of places without having to own a car if they don't want to. Or they can leave their car at home when they choose to and still get around. And the roads then aren't so congested that people can't make it work. So I guess I'm hoping that thinking about those kinds of examples, and that we're not talking about keeping people from driving, we're not talking about is this good and that bad, it's that a redundant, resilient system is less fragile. And the system in Los Angeles right now is very fragile because if one thing breaks down, then the whole system falls apart. They're now retrofitting rail and other things for that very reason. And so I guess for me, it's really thinking, I think very conservatively about the kind of system that you need so that it isn't fragile, so that it does work, so that it is redundant and it is resilient. And that's a system that has choices, that has options, that lets people do one thing one day and another thing another day. And I hope that isn't partisan. It sure shouldn't be. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, ma'am.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity because this is a conversation that has to get a lot bigger than just me or just the city of Boise or even just Compass. It has to get to everybody in this region who's thinking about these things. Clearly you guys are, so I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. And good to see you again in person after 3 years.
It's been a while.
It has.
I used to come up to Moscow and do work when Walter was up there. So we saw each other probably more in person then than recently.
We did. We did. Thank you. Thank you both. Okay, from rail, we're going to the I-84 corridor with Hunter Mulhall, again with Compass, and he's going to talk about the corridor operations plan. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about the corridor study we just wrapped up at the end of the summer on I-84. As you know, there's some big investments happening on the west end of the corridor, so this study is really about looking at some other investments for the next generation of the corridor. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the background and the need, the objectives of the plan, and then I'll highlight some of the contents. There's quite a bit in there, so I'll leave it up to you to dig into the details if you'd like. And then I'll talk about the next steps and expected outcomes. The need for this study came from our latest update of our Treasure Valley TSMO plan. I'll define TSMO just in a second here, but I've already heard a couple mentions of it just in discussion as we're going, but it's the management and operations. So it was identified in that plan to really identify some of those types of investments to expand the life of these capacity projects we're doing, make the corridor safer, more efficient, and reliable. So the project was managed with ITD and Compass, along with stakeholder input from the land use agencies and the transit, Valley Regional Transit agencies along the corridor. TSMO stands for Transportation Systems Management and Operations. Intelligent Transportations, or ITS is Intelligent Transportation Systems. I heard you all mention you made a visit to the Traffic Management Center that ACHD manages, so that's a good, fine example of TSMO and ITS. It's all about technologies or information you can get to travelers, or ways you can manage traffic in operation to make things safer and more efficient and reliable. So a good example, if you see the incident management trucks as well, help clear the accidents quicker, get people to the side and shoulder, get them off the road faster. Ramp metering is probably something that you've seen in other areas where they stagger people merging onto the interstate. So the plan, we really have a broad audience here. We wanted to reach policymakers to make the case for these types of investments and improvements. We wanted to provide enough information for people in planning and funding to be able to procure the money and capital to do these projects. We also wanted to give the implementing agencies enough information to really get these projects rolling off the ground. The scope of the project goes from exit 25 out in Middleton all the way to exit 57 at Gowan and the I-184 corridor dropping off into downtown Boise. I mentioned the stakeholders before, several land use agencies, ITD, Valley Regional Transit, the state police, our freight advisory work group, ACHD, and StateCom. The first part of the project was to look at the current challenges on the corridor. We broke it up into different segments, looked at crash data, travel time data to identify congestion points. We also interviewed stakeholders along the corridor to see what kind of challenges they were seeing. The segment B, the one that runs through Meridian here, has the highest volumes on the corridor. It also saw the highest number of crashes on the corridor. About half of those were rear ends in that segment. They also mentioned the stakeholders saw some spillback and congestion at the 10-mile and Meridian interchanges. Those were noted. And transit also experienced some pretty heavy delays on the route running through here. Understanding the current challenges, the stakeholders came up with some goals and objectives for what we're trying to achieve with these investments. So improve safety of the corridor, respond to the growth by maximizing capacity and reliability, and then also make sure that anything we do on this corridor works in tandem with the other pieces of our transportation systems, our state highways, arterials, and our transit services. The next step was to identify the strategies and then screen them or pare them down and then rank them or prioritize them. So initially we had almost 40 tactics identified or different types of strategies we could use. We really did a pretty high-level screening of those to make sure that they met the goals that we were trying to achieve with the plan. Then we had a second level of screening after we paired out some of the tactics we identified there, where we looked a little bit deeper and more quantitative at some of the strategies, what they might cost, the feasibility, and then where we could calculate some of the benefits. And so that list was pared down to about 17 different strategies that are listed in the plan. This is a cut straight from the plan. You can see how each one of the tactics scored in the first screening and the second level, and they're prioritized by overall score in the list there. Having this list and understanding this, in the last stakeholder meeting, we did an exercise where we were imagining we were applying for a grant to implement some of these projects. And some of the top tactics that came out of that exercise were ramp metering, road service patrols, dynamic roadway warning, which is automatic warning systems to let you know if there's ice or water or other things over the roadway, and active traffic management. You may have seen some of those are the overhead gantries that will display variable speed limit if you choose to do that. You can let people know ahead of time if a lane is closed ahead. And you can also warn of a queue or a backup. So those rear end crashes, for example, mitigate some of those. The plan lays out a vision of how all these tactics would operate along the corridor. You can see all 17 of them, pretty good depiction of what we're talking about here. And then in the back of the plan, I talked about our audience being the implementers. Each one of these tactics, we have these 2-page cuts where we detailed what a project implementing these tactics might look like. So we laid out a high-level scope, schedule, phasing, who the stakeholders might be, what the capital and operating costs might be, benefits, and where available, and then other related initiatives and funding sources. We also had a little bit of additional funding, and we kind of jumped on an opportunity where our consultant had done some ramp metering analysis up in the Spokane area, so they already had really a pretty high-level sketch planning tool to look at what ramp metering might look like along our interstate if it was feasible with the current configuration. So that's actually in the appendix of this plan, where we looked at several of the different interchanges and determined if the current configuration would support ramp metering. There's one last piece of the plan that's in progress. We are looking at high occupancy vehicle lanes. So thinking down the road at the next iteration of the I-84 corridor, should we go and add an additional lane, would it make any sense to implement a high occupancy vehicle lane? So this is really an information gathering exercise, pretty high level planning. There's still a lot of barriers. There's currently legislation prohibiting HOV lanes in our area. So this is really an exercise to determine whether chasing down that path to change the law and doing deeper analysis is worth it. So we're looking at doing some case studies of other areas where they've implemented HOV. We're using our travel demand model to estimate what potential use of the HOV might look like down the road in 2050. We're developing some design concepts. There's several different ways to manage and operate HOV lanes, and then trying to come up with a high-level cost-benefit estimate on there. So, the next steps are to finish that HOV analysis by the end of the year here. We're going to continue to work with ITD and our internal work groups to develop and program and fund these tactics, and also look through grant opportunities to make some of these projects happen. And then just a summary, what Meridian could expect to see, just some of the potential strategies on the corridor that might impact your area on I-84 is you could see ramp meterings potentially at 10 Mile, Meridian, and Eagle. You might see more digital messaging signs, so some areas were identified down on the southern part of Meridian Road and 10 Mile. Improved signal interchange, signals at interchanges, so you mentioned the Eagle Road signal optimization. Some technologies are available there to make some improvements. They're currently studying an auxiliary lane between the Meridian and Eagle interchanges, so that's something that falls in those TSMO categories. Smart work zones, if you've driven through the construction out on the west end, you've seen how they're using the variable speeds, where when they know they have work going on, they'll lower the speeds and they'll bump them back up when people aren't there. There's other pretty cool technologies that can measure travel times through constructions and let people know how big delays might be, things like that. And then also I mentioned the active traffic management, so overhead gantries with possibly variable speed limits, lane closures, or queue warnings. So I'll open it to questions if anybody has any.
Thank you, sir. Questions?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Smith?
Could you expand, I mean, obviously you don't have the text in front of us, but the legislation preventing HOV lanes, what exactly, do you know roughly what the kind of, I hear some chuckling, I'm sure there's a lot more knowledge around here than what I know, but could you just educate me on what that specific?
Sure, my understanding of it is, Mr. Chair, Commissioner, my understanding is that there's legislation, and I believe it's in the same piece of legislation that prohibits local option tax. But it also mentions that only resort communities, so I believe that's Sun Valley and McCall, are able to implement an HOV lane, but it's prohibited in other areas. So that's something.
Really?
That's something that's one of the barriers and reasons why we're really doing this information gathering and studying to see if it's worth lobbying to get this law changed. So I know local option tax is something that we, in our political stance in HOV, that Compass is looking at trying to change. So
The only problem with HOV lanes is your person that's out on the interstate counting the number of cars that have more than one person could very well fall asleep between cars, but that's just my opinion.
That's a good point, Mr. Chair. We're actually looking at, in the case study, some violation rates for different areas, and it varies pretty widely. There's some pretty high ones. You can see up to 30% violation rates in some areas. And so when you're making these investments, I think those are some of the things you have to consider as enforcement is definitely one of the investments or things that come along with this type of lane or this type of investment. So.
Thank
Other
you.
questions?
Thank you.
Oh, no, you're not through. I've got a couple.
Okay, great.
Please. I'm excited about ramp metering.
Yeah.
It's counterintuitive. It makes no sense that a red light lets more people get on the interstate than no light, but my understanding is it really does. So I was excited to hear about that. Did you take a look at any, and I don't know what the correct terminology is, in reversing lanes based upon time of day, like flowing in the morning and out in the afternoon like they do in what I-90 either does it or used to do it in Seattle?
Mr. Chair, yes, that was an option thrown out there, but I believe it was quickly thrown out because there's a few grade separations between the different directional
Okay.
lanes that would make it pretty challenging to do. But I think there may be some sections you could look at doing that. And that's definitely one of the neater TSMO strategies that you can see out there is the contraflow lane, switching back, and the movable barriers that you can see in some areas.
Right. Okay. Yes, sir.
Sorry, I have one
No,
more.
no.
I'm stuck on this. I'm
Made
stuck
you
on
think
this
about
state
something.
law.
I think he's channeling Mr. Lancaster.
Yeah, he's with us in spirit today. No, I'm stuck on the state law. I don't quite have the pocket change to be in Sun Valley too often, at all, actually. But do they actually does anyone know, do they use HOV lanes? Have you reached out to them? Has there been any discussion around that or any of those resort towns about the impact that might have had, for better or worse?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Smith, I'm not aware of any HOV facilities in Idaho. I don't believe they've implemented any. I think they just had some representatives that got what they wanted in the law or said they would vote for it if it had a clause in it. I'm not sure what the reasoning behind it is.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a
Ma'am.
question? Hunter, do express lanes fall under that same language as HOV lanes in the code, or would there be an option for express lanes?
Are you talking, sorry, Miranda, Ms. Carson. You're talking about like you see in Salt Lake City, the toll lanes?
Yeah, but I'm thinking maybe not necessarily toll, but lanes that are limited egress. So a lane that, so I'm thinking, and my experience with it is in South Florida, the lane has limited egress, so you can't get off at every exit. You can only get off at one exit in Boise, one exit in Meridian, one exit in Nampa.
No, that's not something that we're looking at in the study, yeah. But that's an interesting concept, though. Something interesting to think about.
Okay. Thank you. Really
Mr. Chair.
appreciate you coming.
Mr. Chair, John Wasson, ACHD. Could I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Where I have seen ramp metering work really well is on interstates that have short access ramps. Idaho is blessed in a lot of ways in that our access ramps go between a quarter of a mile and a mile in length before you merge onto the freeway so you can build up to speed. Do you think ramp metering is the way to go, or maybe also enact some sort of ordinance or law that says you got to give up that number 4 lane, you can't drive and sit in it all the time, and that way people can get on the interstate and they can merge into the 1, 2, or 3 lane and let that number 1 lane stay open for people getting on the interstate and people getting off the interstate.
Thanks for the question. I think what I'm understanding is that maybe a different configuration might be more efficient than a ramp metering, possibly.
It could be. I mean, I haven't looked into that much, but I know, let's say you go up to Spokane and you look at Thor and Freya, they're like 600 feet ramps. I mean, they're horrible ramps. Of course, they're designed by WashDOT and not ITD. And so ITD's got a heck of a lot better ramp, but that might be something to consider.
Yes, that was actually, there was a mention of different configurations of some of the interchanges. Some of them are outdated, and there's known better configurations for the type of interchanges and that type of service. So that's definitely something that I think when the rubber starts to meet the road, that's something they'll have to consider there. I think from our high-level planning analysis that ramp metering, the cost-benefit ratio was fairly high. I think you see a lot of efficiencies in just better merging in the mainline speed. I think you see some mitigation of safety issues with just less of these big platoons coming in and trying to merge into traffic. So there's definitely more work to be done there. This was really just to narrow down that long list of types of investments we could make operationally. So I think it's something that ITD would like to pursue a little bit further, and this is just the first step.
Could we also give out a copy of your PowerPoint to the members?
Yes, of course, happy to. And the plan, there's a link, Mr. Chair. There's a link in the memo directly to the plan.
Okay, super. Yeah. Thank you. And I have noticed on I-5 in Seattle, those metered ramps are short. I mean, you could stack all of 10 cars maybe, but they still work to move them on. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Let's move on to item 7 under new business, the Lost Rapids citizen request.
Thank you.
Mrs. Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It does not look like the citizen that made this request is here, but I had planned to present it, and we'll follow up with him. A citizen recently requested speed limit signs be posted near Bird Park on Lost Rapids, and also later in conversation with him as well requested consideration for a painted crosswalk. He didn't directly say paint a crosswalk, but he said, could you also consider a painted crosswalk at the Bird Park entrance? So there's a photo there of the location that we're talking about, as well as the exact language from his correspondence. I'm not going to read that to you, but John Wasson is here, of course. He did let me know that there's no specific guidance for how far apart the speed limit signs are posted. And then I also spoke with Sergeant Dance regarding collecting some information on speeds in that area. And he gave me a pretty comprehensive response, but the short answer was MPD wouldn't set up a speed trailer in that location because there are bike lanes that would be blocked, but he will add that stretch to the area of emphasis to get more police presence out there for enforcement of speed violations. So the request before you is if you have any discussion that needs to be had and any action that the Transportation Commission would recommend the city take regarding the 2 requests the citizen made.
Chairman?
I really am missing Mr. Lancaster, because I'm looking over there for him to hold his hand up. I'll jump at it first. Can we get ropes out there that'll count volumes and speeds to see if this citizen's complaint is valid to what's really going on out there?
Mr. President, yes, we can. Yes, we have. And yes, there is some speeding. The problem with this section of road is it's built very wide. It's collector plus width. There's no front-on housing. There's no impetus for a driver to be looking for a driveway to see traffic coming in or out. It's not It's not really residential. It's got a lot of commercial on there. A crosswalk at the park would serve not really the park, but it would serve more of the Costco businesses out there, if I recall the speed limit or the area. And looking at it, we could almost make a case for increasing the posted speed limit out there. There are no plans for that. There are no plans for that. And like Miranda mentioned, the guidance for posting additional speed limit signs is really pretty vague. First, and obvious, is where the speed limit changes, you want to have a speed limit sign. And where you have an extraordinarily long stretch of road that you're going to have people coming in and out and might miss a speed limit sign or not know what it is, you could post one. Would posting a mid-block speed limit sign be against the MUTCD? The answer is no. Would posting a midpoint speed limit sign make a difference in the speeds on the street? In my experience, probably not, but it's something that ACHD could do.
You would be more likely to do that than a mid-block crosswalk. I get your comment about Costco, but most people that go to Costco aren't going to carry it in their arms back home. They need a trunk of a car to get it all in.
Mr. Chair, and that's kind of where I'm going, is there doesn't seem to be an obvious reason or draw to want to go from Costco to the park, other than somebody's hope that somebody seeing a crosswalk will slow down. And in my experience, that's probably not a good assumption. They'll slow down if they see somebody in the middle of the road sometimes, but the paint on the road surface probably is not going to be indicative of that they need to slow down. The speed limit signs, I'm not sure whether they'll make a difference. The one place they will make a difference is when Corporal Goodspeed and his team pull somebody over and says, "Didn't you see these 2 speed limit signs that you just blasted by?" And the guy will go, "What speed limit signs?"
You'll see them, he will see them next time.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. It's your neighborhood.
Yeah, my house is in this picture. So, yeah, there is a problem. Recently, though, they double striped the bike lane, and I will tell you that's made me go slower. I always go the speed limit. My wife has noticed it because at risk of her getting a ticket on this road, because I've been with her, and I'm like, you should slow down. It's not a racetrack. But I'm curious what the purpose of the double striping of the bike lane was. That's narrowed the road, and I think it has had some impact on speed for sure because it was wider.
Commissioner Shoemaker, Mr. President, the reason for installing buffered bike lanes is what those are, was to give the bicyclists a little additional standoff space and narrow down the road travel lane to make it seem to drivers that it's narrower and to dissuade them from going a little bit faster. We've had some mixed results with that. Some places we've seen speeds go up. Some we've seen them go down slightly. So it's not a one fix takes care of everything, but that's why we put them out there to increase the shy space for the bicycles and also to narrow down the roadway.
There was some chatter on the Facebook club group or whatever in there that they said that the older people's bicycle needed their own lane and the bikes could have their own personal lane because it's a 55-plus community just north of there. I don't know if they were being serious or not, but anyways, I reckon have 2 kids, well, 3 kids that have a bus stop right there at the Keithburg Park, and it's amazing to me how quickly people travel through that lane, sitting there in the mornings, and so it is a problem. But it's also a very busy park. At night, there's some sort of dog trainer that fills that whole area up, and there's football practice, and I think that's why there's some issue with some of the crosswalk, because they're parking in that 55 plus, and it's very busy for the location and what people are doing, so.
Mr. Chair? If I may, Mr. Watson, was the speed collection that you mentioned done before or after that buffered bike lane was painted?
I know we've done some before. I'd have to go back and look and see if we've done after. And if we have done after, I can certainly get that to you pretty quickly. If we haven't, the weather's still good and I can get a speed study done this month.
And can you remind me what the requirement is for if we did request a crosswalk for the park?
We'd be looking at utilization, so we'd put staff out there at certain times to see if we're seeing about 20 pedestrians in an hour.
Maybe a time of day thing,
It very well could be.
based upon the commissioner's comments.
And we typically work 7 to 7. Not always, but typically.
Typically. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair. Question, just not necessarily recommending this, but just to frame kind of the potential options. What would hypothetically, say, a speed bump or some sort of actual physical alteration beyond painting, what would that require, and what would what limitations, if any, on that would there be? Just again, kind of framing the both ends of.
Commissioner Smith, Chairman Steed, I'm glad you asked because my alias is Mr. Traffic Calming. So I get to do most all of the traffic calming for the county. So this street is classified as a collector road. So if we put the hoses out, the first thing we're going to be looking for is a peak hour volume of 300 vehicles in a peak hour. That's assuming that the road does not have 4,000 or more ADT. If it has 4,000 or more trips per day, it's not eligible for traffic calming. But between 400 and 4,000, that's the sweet spot that we typically look at. So the volume would have to be 300 because it's a collector road and there are no front-on homes on that section. If it doesn't meet that, then we would look at the speeds, and we'd look at the 85th percentile and the 95th percentile. And I could be within a mile of this one, so forgive me, but we'd be looking at 35 miles an hour for the 85th percentile speed and 37 miles an hour for the 95th percentile speed. If that happened, then typically we would have a champion, somebody who's pushing for it. And most of the time we require signatures from the residents of the street or the residents of the street that are adjacent to it that would be using it. Right now, that criteria would be about 75% of the residents in the area. And then we do a cut-through study. Those typically take place on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from 7 to 9 and from 4 to 6 in the evening. And we do a license plate study to determine who's cutting from Chinden down to 10 Mile. If you have enough cut-through, ACHD would pay for it. If not, the champion would be requested to pay for it. We also seek input from police, fire, and EMS. And we are also in the process of switching over from speed humps to speed cushions. Speed cushions are, in most cases, 3-part builds. They could be 4-part, but 3-part builds where you have a wheel cut right in the middle of the road so that the fire truck can go right through that gap and not have to slow down, as can 350s, 450s, excursions, larger wheelbase vehicles can also do that. But for most vehicles, what we find is it's going to slow them down 3 to 4 miles an hour and eliminate a lot of those if there are excessive higher speeds, like 45, 55, 65s.
And just to follow up on that, thank you for that. Are there any, whether it's internal policy or regulation, any changes, the same way that in a school zone, for example, methodologies are slightly different, given that there's a similar, kids at the park, et cetera, are there any considerations for parks or other kind of civic activity centers the same way there are for schools?
No, but we are in the process of reevaluating our traffic calming policy. And one of the things that we are looking at is I'll use the word credit. So we lower the criteria by 1 mile an hour for walk routes, school routes, and parks, just as an example. And so with enough credit, that 37 could drop to a 35, and the 35 could drop to a 33. The other thing you didn't mention, but I'm going to assume that you would consider, was what if the city of Meridian picks up the champion? And quite honestly, that would be a discussion that would probably happen between the mayor and the city council and my commission and the director, and I probably shouldn't presuppose how that conversation could, should, or will go.
Thank you.
Follow up on one of your comments a minute ago. You talked about 75% of the neighborhood needing to agree to speed humps. Does that apply to cut-through volumes? If you did a license plate study for cut-throughs, which was one of the comments about the complainant, would the 75% come into play, or would cut-throughs alone qualify?
Mr. President, it's the petition process gives us the neighborhood support for the speed humps to go forward, and that's where the 75% is. And in the policy, we're recommending that drop to possibly 70% and be done electronically as opposed to somebody circulating a physical petition. The cut-through study is based upon the ADT, and the best way I can say is if you have 200 cars a day, you're going to have 80% cut-through. If you have 2,000 cars a day, you're going to have 15% cut through. Less cars, you got to have more people cutting through. Lots of cars, and it equates to about the same volume of vehicles. And so what we do is we write down at each end of the street, license plate ends in XYZ. And then at the other end of the street, we look to see, does that XYZ pop out in 3, 4, 5, 8 minutes? If it is, that's cut through traffic. If it takes 15, 20, 25 minutes, they were doing something legal or illegal, legitimate or illegitimate in the neighborhood, in Costco, or wherever they were doing something.
I don't know that you answered my question. Does the neighborhood approval apply to cut-throughs?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lewis.
just a couple of comments. First, on the posting of the speed limit, I think what's out there is fine. As Mr. Wasson said in the memo, there's a speed limit sign as you enter Lost Rapids from Chinden. There's a speed limit sign as you enter from 10 Mile. And the default speed limit in Meridian, as we know from previous meetings, is 25 miles an hour. So no one should be going faster than that and claiming they didn't know what was going on. So I think what's there is fine. What interests me more is the potential crossing there at the entrance to Bird Park, with that a residential development, which on the map is still empty, but it's going to be growing and filling in. I'd be interested in seeing a crosswalk study.
I think that's filled in now, hasn't it? The north side of Lost Rapids across from the park?
It's like 2/3 done.
Two-thirds done?
It's gated. That is a gated section of the community.
Oh, okay.
I interrupted your thought, but
Oh, no, that's fine. I mean, I'd be interested in seeing a crosswalk study at the entrance to Bird Park.
yes, sir.
So there's no parking on either side of that street. You can't park on Lost Rapids, and there's no parking going into that. So I don't know where you would be parking to cross the road there anyway.
So who are the people bringing their dogs? Where are they coming from? The neighborhood?
They park on that street. Everyone, even though it's no parking, so then you have bike lanes that are, so it was interesting, the trailer, the speed trailer, I'm like, well, it's just gonna get parked in by cars anyway, because every night of the week it's, so, but a crosswalk, it'd be interesting, but there's really no place to park to cross the road there. That would be, I suspect, whoever wrote this email, they maybe live in that section of the community.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
2 questions. Is it signed no parking? Okay. And then my second question is for Mr. Wasson. Is the 75% that you mentioned, I'm going to share my screen here. So typically when you and I talk, it's 75% of the adjacent properties. Being that the adjacent properties here is likely HOA, are you saying it would have to be 75% of this entire neighborhood? Or would it just be this HOA and possibly if this is a different HOA and that HOA and...
Ms. Carson, Mr. Chair, it would be the resident. First of all, we don't ask HOAs for their approval or disapproval. It would be a number of the residents in there that would take primary access from their residential street onto Lost Rapids.
Thank you.
And I would have to go back to the office and spend a day or so trying to figure out, am I being fair and equitable? Because a lot of those people are going to be in the gated community, and they would get a vote also.
Because that's their only way out, it looks like.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
So it sounds like we're kind of nearing towards some modicum of consensus around some studies that might want to be done. It sounds like from the feedback from Commissioner Shoemaker that there really shouldn't be people parking and crossing there anyway. And so part of me wants to see if it's possible to, during those hours where people might be parking, to get, I don't know if a squad car or someone out there, either warning or writing tickets to keep people from doing that, especially if there is cut-through traffic and there's an area that they shouldn't be parking and they're crossing and, cut through at peak times. It feels like there's a couple different opportunities to avoid that. Now, I don't know where they would end up parking, if it's deeper in the neighborhood or if they would have to walk some other area across, 10 Mile that's less safe. But I guess my thoughts around a potential motion, and this isn't me making one at the moment, but throwing the, potential discussion out, is one, asking for some sort of speed study, but also asking for MPD to put to investigate some enforcement in that area to limit that, unlawful crossing of that road anyway. But, opening up for any thoughts around that.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
as you look at this, I don't see how there's adequate parking to utilize that park at all for what they're doing there.
It appears not to be.
And I'm going to guess that's the major problem with that park and its location is there's no way that's enough parking. Well, you said there's a football practice and plus dogs, so you've got 50 cars. You can't get 50 cars in that parking lot. So I'm not sure unless people are parking out here on these outside roads surrounding that park, which then you're going to have those people complaining about people parking and then crossing through their yards to get into the park.
it seems possible that one of the outcomes is this park is just being overutilized, and that's where this issue might be stemming from, is the not enough parking for the, for the area, and perhaps with proper enforcement or increased enforcement, maybe the dog people or the practice needs to find an additional location or a separate location that it makes more sense to practice at, or things like that. I'm not sure, these are just potential outcomes, but that could be a root cause here of it's just being overutilized.
Mr. Hood, if this tests your memory too much, just say, I don't remember. The general question is, does the city allow parks with no parking?
So, Mr. Chair.
And that's a little bit off of what we started talking about, but I think it'll help answer their question.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll answer your question first. So if this were a neighborhood park owned and maintained by the HOA, yes, we do have a parking requirement for the structure square footage, based on the structure square footage. So not based on how big the park is or anything like that, but all of our parking requirements are associated with gross floor area of an associated structure, a clubhouse or something similar. So technically, there's no parking required. I think there's a restroom here, but there's really not any other facility that has square footage. So this is a city park, though, so we could potentially, or the neighborhood could potentially petition the Parks Department to add some additional parking spaces if that's the issue at the end of the day.
Some parking spaces.
Yeah, but again, it's not a code issue in this case. It may be a practical issue, being overused, but it's code compliant, and again, there isn't like a separate calculation for a number of car parks per acre for a park.
Gentlemen, what are your wishes, if any?
I would like to hear, so on my enforcement question, I wonder if Corporal Goodspeed has any input about, obviously, don't want to have you drinking from a fire hose right out of the gate, but if you have any thoughts around capabilities or what that might look like.
Commissioner Smith and President Steed, I not just myself, but everybody on the traffic team are aware that there's a speed issue at times on Lost Rapids, as there are on 99% of the roadways in Meridian. Like everybody else, we have a finite amount of resources. Unfortunately, most of our time these days is spent on response, mainly to crashes and other issues. But when we are able to provide directed enforcement, we make our best effort to do so when it's most needed, which would why a study of this area would be helpful for us. With our one trailer that does record data, we can do our own studies. I'm going to talk with Mr. Wasson here in a minute about where we might possibly be able to place a trailer on this roadway and give us an idea when to most effectively use our resources instead of trying to post someone up there all day long. So long story short, or short story long, we are aware there's an issue, and we do attempt as often as we can to get up there. Unfortunately, that's probably not what you necessarily want to hear. But this large city, and there's a large amount of problems, the same type of problems everywhere that we're trying to address simultaneously. So we're doing our best. We know that there's an issue, and when we can, we will get up there and do some enforcement at the appropriate times. But I'm not waiting for a study. We do get up there often. I like to go up there for just that reason, because I do find plenty of opportunity to meet people on that roadway and discuss some driving behavior changes. And I don't know how much effect it has. It might just on that one person, but just having our lights on the side of the road as people drive by allow other drivers to know that, maybe they just think twice that, oh, yeah, okay, there's some speed issues I need to watch for myself sometimes. So we'll do what we can going forward.
And does parking enforcement take I mean, obviously you still have a person out there, but is the same way that you might target speed enforcement around a certain period of time, if there's a known parking issue, would that be potentially less of a bandwidth kind of drain to know, hey, maybe we send someone out here, write a couple tickets, put a couple warnings on windshields, kind of get a point across that, hey, you shouldn't be parking here? Or would that still be a significant amount of drainage that is maybe not beneficial to, I guess worth the squeeze given all your other, I don't want to, ask the police department to do everything and solve the world, but, just some thoughts.
Commissioner, there's priorities, obviously, but in this situation of parking especially, we have a number of people, in fact, we just hired 3 non-sworn officers, and that's part of their duties is parking enforcement. So that helps out. And I can also direct that they specifically go out and look for these violations in particular locations. That helps a lot because we're not taking an officer away from other duties that they may not be able to meet the need to write parking enforcement citations or warnings at that location. So again, we do have extra personnel for that, and I can certainly, it's on my list. I will move it to the higher than the top of the list. But there's a lot of locations fighting for that top spot, and we try to be as accommodating as possible. So, but I can ask and direct these particular officers to spend time up there.
Thank you.
I think the parking discussion's gotten away from what started the whole discussion. If anything, the parking, legal or illegal, is probably slowing down traffic on that street when it's done. I'm not saying you shouldn't go out and spend some ink doing a little educating. I guess I was originally thinking the crosswalk was a problem because there were children moving to go to the park to play on the playground or whatever, not knowing who walks across. The 4 times I've driven it since this came out, I haven't seen anybody walk across there. It sounds like it's local and cut-through traffic that is apparently speeding. I talked to Sergeant Dance about the speed trailer before he got in the memo, and I heard it. My thought was to put it out there without it being lit up or without having a speed limit sign on it, just to get data, volumes and speeds. And if you can't put it in a bike lane, can you set it in a tree lawn? Rhetorical. But if you've got rope data, you've got what he can get with his trailer. Probably, or possibly, I don't know the difference in the accuracy, but it doesn't really matter. But if you've got fairly recent rope data with volumes and speeds, then we've got that answer.
Mr. Chairman, John Wasson, ACHD. If I don't have it, I'll get it. It's really, I mean, that's too easy to get. The biggest thing is I would request no excessive presence from Meridian Police Department on that road, because I don't want their presence to influence the data that we're going to collect.
Understood.
So I can get with Corporal Goodspeed tomorrow or Wednesday, one of the two, and let him know what the 2 or 3 most recent speed studies we've done out there are. I'll get them as soon as I can over to Miranda, and I'll also look to see if this is a potential for a speed feedback sign. Don't know whether it would be, but that's something that could be considered.
Good answers. Commissioners, does that put you in a position of not jumping off and making a motion, but saying, please do so, and we'll put this on the agenda for next month?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I'm a little curious. Miranda, do you know what that zoning is behind Costco? I mean, what's going to go in there? Is that going to be part of that gated community? Is that going to be a future expansion there? Is that going to be residential or commercial?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I'm sorry. Oh,
Mr. Hood?
Mr. Hood says it's
To
residential.
the west to the left.
In this area,
Oh, that's all,
that
it's
what
all
you're
high
referring to?
density.
That's
Sorry,
townhouses.
Townhomes.
What about,
There's apartments to the south there. Yep, those are almost done, I think. They've been constructing them for quite a while. And then commercial, you can even see Cafe Rio and some of that along the frontage. And then, yeah, west is all, I think that's part of the 55 and over. I don't know if those are age restricted as well, but yeah, it's all townhouse style all the way back to Tree Farm Way. Zoning, I don't remember. I think it's R15, but it's all residential zoning.
so you're going to greatly increase the amount of folks that are going to possibly utilize that
Isn't it
park?
full now, Caleb?
I don't know if it's fully built out or not. I don't know that all those homes are occupied there.
Okay.
My comment was more about the apartment complex going in just south of Costco. It's got to be pretty close to being occupied now. There's still a couple pad sites along 10 Mile that haven't developed yet, but some commercial along 10 Mile, but all the rest of it is residential.
Thank you.
so there may be need to evaluate for a crosswalk at a future date as those come in. It might be something that the prioritization subcommittee looks at, adding to the list for future consideration of crosswalk as ADT increases or something to that effect, if it's not something that we consider with this current request.
Let's let ACHD and our new representative from the police department take a look at stuff, see what they come up with, thinking wise, communicate with Miranda, and put this back on the agenda for next month. Any problems with that?
No, Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So the citizen's request was to put a speed limit sign up.
And a crosswalk.
And a crosswalk. And I think we're deciding not to do that until we get more information from
At this time, correct.
these speed studies. So I think we ought to, by unanimous consent or something, just agree to inform that person of that decision.
Mr. Chair, I think
So that we don't have this sort of in limbo, so they know that what direction we're going.
Agreed. Yes, ma'am.
just to be consistent with past meetings, the action the commission decides to take is completely up to you, but we did have a discussion, I think 3 meetings ago, that a motion was not needed for me to follow up with resident, that's something that I do as staff, regardless of a motion that the commission makes. If you want to make a motion recommending I follow up with the resident, you're welcome to. I'm going to do it either way.
I don't know that we need to with that comment. And with ACHD proposing what they could do, we don't need a motion to ask them to do it either. So, thank you. All right, last item on the new business, staff communication. Mrs. Carson, you were up.
I think I can get it done in 7 minutes. Most of these items are just kind of informative. Want to let you know on the overgrown weeds on the sidewalk. I'm going to jump around just a little bit. I apologize. Overgrown weeds on the sidewalk. That's something that comes up pretty frequently. That's the reason it's in your packet, just to let you know that this is how it's handled. There's some follow-up there on Records Way. It sounds like y'all already got the update on former Commissioner Leckie. There's an update on that Pleasant View gondola crosswalk request that we've discussed in the past. And then the final item was city jurisdiction and transportation planning. We had an inquiry from a citizen that I summed up with a few bullets. Just to kind of sum it up, he was frustrated in how road planning and land use planning is integrated in our area. It's a common discussion point amongst planners because we are unique in that ACHD does roads and then the city agencies and county agencies do land use. Mr. Hood had a very good response to that, so I included it in the packet just as kind of a educational point for this group if you need that information. The one thing going to take more than 30 seconds on, is speed limit change on Meridian Road. I wanted to let you know that the speed limit increased on Meridian Road from 35 miles per hour to 40 miles per hour. That was done. ACHD did speak to Meridian Police Department regarding that change. It wasn't a change that got brought through the Planning Department, so it wasn't something that was discussed with the Transportation Commission. I don't know that we necessarily had a exact procedure with ACHD on how, we would want to discuss those things in the future, but I did want to let you know that I've spoken with Sergeant Dance and very briefly with Corporal Goodspeed, and that in the future, if MPD gets a request to weigh in on an issue such as a speed limit change, that they would also advise that inquiry, be it ITD or ACHD, to come to the Planning Department as well. And the Planning Department will do the same if we get one of those inquiries, ask the Police Department to weigh in as well, because there are land use, decisions that are made differently from police decisions. We have different opinions. That's why we're subject matter experts in different things. So this one was a slight lapse in how we would have liked for the situation to be handled. The speed limit's already been raised. I don't know that there's any discussion to be had about lowering it, unless that's something you want to talk about at the next meeting. I just wanted to let you know that that had happened, and going forward, when there's speed limit changes, hopefully we, as a planning department, will be considered, and we'll bring that forward if that's necessary to the Transportation Commission.
Thank you, ma'am. Commissioners, I would like to point out two things in the report. The West Ada School District comment on the bottom of page 32 regarding Black Cat and Gondola is a very good explanation of where things are on that. And also, as Miranda mentioned, bottom of page 33, I thought that Mr. Hood's response to the request from the citizens that Amity, Cloverdale to Eagle be widened to 4 lanes was an excellent response to that. So with that, and with a minute on the clock, 3 minutes on the computer clock, anybody have anything else? Chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody that want to stay? We are adjourned. Thank you, one and all.
Usually, if they get that close, they vote to.
Mr. Song, I hope this lived up to your expectations.
Oh, yeah. Just listening about
Yeah, did I not get you in? Did you? Okay. I did this in one day because I had COVID last week, so I did it in one day. So I may have cut you off. No, that's fine.
Exactly. We're of like minds there.